Welcome to the Encountermancer, a Dungeons & Dragons channel dedicated to the resurrection of classic adventure modules through audio dramatization. Assault on Eddistone Point, written by Patricia Need Elrod, was published by TSR and printed in 1986 on the pages of Dungeon Magazine issue number 1. Episode 1, Assault on Eddistone Point. Part 1, Out of the Mist. After hours of planning and provisioning for the coming days, and with even the moon long gone from the night sky, the young volunteers of Obiosal swore oaths of loyalty to each other and their people. Further, they were sworn to seek the road home, to chase any rumor, share any knowledge, and face any peril that might banish the evil that had consumed their island and allow the wandering clans of Seaholm to return. After ministering their vows, Master Seeger, High Priest of Horror, presented each with a small iron coin. On one side was the crossed axe and spear of House Shanus, the last ruling family of Seaholm. On the other was the profile of King Bolin Tinsails, last king to sit the throne. By these coins, the faithful children of Seaholm shall know you. In times of need, the elders of the clans are bound to provide aid and comfort, and when called, you in turn are bound to serve. In the deepest hours of night, the companions were herded into Master Seeger's wagon and finally allowed their rest, sheer exhaustion overcoming nervous anticipation. When Eric woke, the sun was well on the way to its zenith, and everyone was still asleep, save Tharsis, who sat studying a book Master Olden had left with him the night before. Thinking they had overslept, he went about waking the others, having to return to Meccan several times before some helpful threats from the twins finally opened his eyes. With everyone eventually up, and the last of the sleeping pads being folded, the door out at the back of the wagon swung open to admit Master Seeger. Surprised to find them awake, he passed around mugs of hot, thin oatmeal before letting in a portly man from Four Trails. "This is Edmund, the mayor of Four Trails. He is the one who asked the Obe for help and has graciously offered to make himself available to answer any questions you might have." Eric, still blowing on his mug, realized everyone in the room was looking to him. Clearing his throat and placing his mug on a nearby table, Eric took a steadying breath. Thank you for coming, Master Edmund. What can we do for you?" Edmund looked to Master Seeger momentarily before beginning. "Young masters, first I would like to thank you on behalf of Four Trails for your assistance. We're in debt, whatever happens. Well, I suppose you have seen the towers atop the peaks? They were built in recent years to establish communication between Kendall to the east and Fadlin to the west. They use polished mirrors to relay vital information between the two cities, market information, potential hazards, trade goods available, and so on. Well, the towers have been so useful it was decided they should be outfitted with special stones enchanted with continual light spells, so the towers could operate at any time, day or night. To that end, a young wizard out of Waterdeep by the name of Delea was contracted to make the appropriate adjustments. She and her entourage, a dwarf by the name of Harold, and 5 mercenaries, they kept to themselves, so I'm afraid I don't know their names. They've been working their way from tower to tower. They arrived here almost a week ago to begin the work on the tower on Eddistone Point. They left for the tower the next morning, in fact, and expected to be gone for several days. 2 nights ago, though, Delia's white crow flew in my window in the dead of night with this message." From a pocket, the mayor produced a scrap of paper. Eric took it and unfolded it. In smudged charcoal, it read simply, "Bandits in Tower. Help." For over an hour, the mayor answered their questions as best he could. Before the Obe's arrival, he had canvassed the town thoroughly, seeking any information that might help any rescue attempt. Woodsmen, goatherds, and any others that had gone within a mile of Eddistone were questioned, and the tales told varied greatly from goblin warbands to a dragon sighting. The only rumor that seemed well substantiated, though, was that strangers had been seen around the peak, though whether that had been Delia and her party or the bandits seemed in doubt. Edmund had begun pacing as he continued on. "This could not have happened at a worse time. Most of the rangers that patrol the route are away north, helping the dwarves there deal with an orc uprising. The only one I know of in the area, Shador, went with Delea as a guide. And the Druids? Most of them are away for the Midsummer Festival. One stayed behind, Cullivan, I believe is his name, and they have a couple of old footmen that help around the place, but they must be in the same trouble as Delea. We just aren't prepared for this. I have a few guards here, but we don't have the equipment or experience for this kind of work. Edmund was in a sweating fit by the time he trailed off, finally stopping his pacing to stare at them pleadingly as the pressure finally started to settle on everyone. Seeker stepped in to calm the mayor. Thank you for coming, Master Edmund. We have much to do before setting out for Eddistone. I do hope you will keep us appraised of any new information that comes your way. Bowing his way out, Edmund thanked them all again before leaving. Seeger closed the door and turned back to reassure everyone. We have quite the task set before us, and little to go on, but these people need our help, and I've watched you all grow into fine, capable folk. You have good heads for the weather, and you'll know what to do when the time comes. For now, we need to finish fetching your gear and get you on your way. Meccan excused himself and stayed behind as the others filed out of the wagon, wanting to get his daily meditation and prayer started. Outside the wagon, they were met by their families who had spent the morning packing provisions and equipment for their trek up the mountain. Master Neffen was there too, with several of his outriders, bearing a number of trunks and bundles between them. After they had accepted their packs, Kenan, Eric's father, brought him one of the heavy, round shields that usually hung from the side of the wagon, and an old spear. Carried these myself a few times. Your own granddad made that shield and turned that spear too. A lot of his work's still about the Obe. No one made shields like he could. Kenan looked like he wanted to say more, but just gave Eric a tight hug and headed back to their wagon. Only then did Eric realize what his decision to join the crew meant for his da. His mother was long dead, and he had no siblings, but it was too late now. He was committed. He said a silent prayer for his father, asking Hor to keep him safe, and turned back to find the others being similarly outfitted. Rennie was testing the string on a longbow as her grandfather, Mord, adjusted the strap on a quiver of arrows. When he was satisfied, he fixed to her belt a long-handled pick and tucked a slim stiletto into her boot. The twins knelt with their father over a large leather tarp rolled out onto the grass. Slung from various pockets and straps were a dizzying array of weapons. Hatchets, knives, short swords, saps, and knuckle dusters. A back-alley arsenal the twins seemed unaware their father possessed, though Eric was sure that had been no accident. Tharsis stood with Master Olned a short distance away, organizing spell components into the hard leather case slung over his shoulder as the old Windwright showed him how to wrap his spell book in the oilcloth he had brought. When Meccan emerged from the wagon with Master Seeger, he wore a steel breastplate. His entire left arm was encased right down to a heavy, studded gauntlet. Embedded in the center of the chest, and on the gauntlet, were large iron circles bearing the two-faced symbol of Hor. A heavy falchion with a brass handguard hung at his waist, and over his shoulders stuck the leather-wrapped handle of a long axe. Eric would have grinned at the sight, had not the deadly, serious nature of their situation finally sunk in. They didn't know who or what they faced. They didn't know how many bandits they would find, and Eric didn't know if all of them would be coming back. Before Corb and Tabin's father left, he gave Eric a stout dagger. "Sharp knives save lives, son. Never be without one." After their families left, Master Neffen opened the trunks he had brought and laid out a number of chain vests and painted leather skirts, like the Outriders wore, for Eric, Rennie, and the twins. Master Huron arrived as they finished, wishing them luck and thanking them one last time before handing Rennie a map with the trail to Eddystone Point marked out. Leaving the circle of the Obe, they all looked back at least once, each wondering if they would be returning. Four Trails sat at the southern tip of a long, shallow valley, while at the north end loomed Eddystone. They couldn't see the tower or even much of the mist-shrouded peak, but they had been assured the path led straight there. The road north was not as large as the trade route, but was paved and well kept, and skirted the wooded valley with hardly a rise or dip, and they made good time. As the day began to dim, the road ended in a large, paved circle that marked the beginning of the switchback trail that would take them to the top. Lighting a small fire in the pit built into its center, they set camp and cooked the 2 game hens Rennie had brought down on the way up. They ate, set the night's watch, and turned in with hardly a word spoken, all of them consumed with thoughts of the next day and what awaited them. Eric woke before dawn to the twins hollering. Grabbing at his spear as he rushed out of the tent, he managed to tear a hole in the roof as he tangled with his blanket and tripped his way out of the flap. Another shout spun him around, spear at the ready. Off among the trees, Korib, Tabin, and Rennie were taking turns throwing axes and knives at a nearby trunk, whooping every time they landed a hit. Since they hadn't seen him, Eric quickly tossed a spear back in the tent, wincing as it slid to the back, poking another hole. Straightening with a sigh of frustration, he noticed Tharsis sitting by the fire with his book, watching him. I thought someone was here. Tharsis nodded, returning to his book, lips clamped tightly together as small convulsions of suppressed laughter shook him. Eric turned away quickly and went to rouse Meccan, who woke with a start when he reached in to give his foot a shake. With everyone up, they each had a mug of the soup Tharsis had put on and been tending since the start of his watch. Eric cleared his throat when everyone was finished with breakfast. Is everyone ready to get ready? I mean, does anyone have to prepare anything? Eric looked to Tharsis, who shook his head. Meccan? I prayed on watch. With nothing else keeping them there, they put out the fire and began breaking down the tents. When that was done, they decided to stash their extra gear before making the trek up the mountain, only packing essential equipment and enough food and water for the next few days. With everything concealed in the surrounding brush, they started up the trail that continued on from the platform. The path was well maintained, and though the slope continued to steepen, they made good progress. Around midday, a chill breeze started up, bringing tendrils of mist down from the peak. Several times over the next hour, Eric caught a faint but unpleasant scent on the breeze. But before he could be sure what he was smelling, Rennie brought her bow off her shoulder, pointing up the slope. Something dead up there. Can you smell it? They couldn't see anything but rocks and trees in the mist, but they all agreed on what they were smelling. They all followed Rennie's example as they continued on more cautiously. Eric took his shield off his back as Meccan and the twins drew their weapons. The smell became fainter as they moved on, but the trail eventually switched back, taking them higher up the mountain, and as they neared the same spot on the slope, the smell returned, stronger than before. Ahead of the others, Tabin and Korib stopped on the road, peering up the slope. As the others caught up, Tabin pointed out a thick patch of scrub. There's something up in those bushes. Eric could see something sticking out of the tangle. Is that a boot? Eric scanned the slope higher up. The trail passes right above there. Let's keep moving. As they continued on, the smell faded again, but the mist continued to thicken. After the next switchback, when the smell began to rise again, they proceeded more slowly, scanning the slope below for the patch they had seen before. There, Rennie said, pointing to a pile of branches and vines. They looked to have been broken off and thrown there. The leaves and needles were beginning to dry out, but it was the hand that stuck out from the pile they were all looking at. Korib and Tabin started down, half sliding on the loose rock and damp weeds. When they reached the pile, Tabin pulled away the mat of dead branches. Everyone winced as the bodies underneath were revealed. Eric called down to the twins as they backed away. How many? Korib took a few steps back towards the bushes, grimacing. 4, 5, I'm not sure. You stay there. We need to bring them up. Meccan, give me your rope. When Eric turned back, he found Meccan turned towards the mountain. Meccan, the rope. Meccan didn't move. Still staring, he whispered back, Something's wrong. It feels wrong here. Tharsis nervously adjusted his case, thumbing open the latch. I feel it too. Eric turned back to the twins. You two get back up here. Rennie had wandered up the trail, searching for sign of what might have happened there when Eric's shout brought her attention around. Seeing everyone staring up the slope, she peered up as well, wondering what they were looking at. They all saw it then. A solid wall of fog, thicker than the mist that already blanketed the area, was rolling down towards them. As it reached the trail, Meccan closed his eyes and reached up to the iron circle embedded in the chest of his armor, invoking Horror's name as he touched the holy symbol. Light burst from his chest at the completion of the prayer, and a sharp hiss echoed from the fog as the impenetrable mass rolled back up the mountain. But it didn't stop all of it. To either side of them, outside the reach of the blessed light, the bank rolled past, obscuring everything. Eric called out to Rennie as she was swallowed up. Grabbing hold of the acolyte, he pointed up the trail. Meccan, that way! Meccan turned the direction Eric was pointing, the light from his armor driving back the fog with another hiss. Rennie, at a dead run, burst from the enveloping mist and skidded to a halt by their side, pulling an arrow from her quiver as they all turned back towards the slope. Meccan's light beamed up the mountain before the fog could reach them. halting it as the trail where Rennie had been was swallowed up once more. But the wall did not retreat this time. The echoing hiss grew louder as it pressed in on the divine light, and this time it was the light that retreated, growing smaller and dimmer as Meccan growled his waning defiance. Eric looked to his shield and spear as the fog closed in. Why was he even carrying them? What good could they do him against this? They were all trapped, and it was his fault. He thought of his father then. He would be alone now, another life ruined by his foolishness. Shouting his god's name, Meccan took a step forward as the two-faced symbol of horror on his gauntlet came to life as well. Only a few yards from them now, the fog screeched at the renewed assault and parted, rolling back once more. Meccan's heart dropped into his boots. Down the slope came dozens of ragged, shambling forms. Gaping, fetid wounds showed through tattered clothing as a chorus of wet, rasping moans rose from dead throats. Meccan raised his long axe and began to sing. Wordless baritone chant rose from his throat as his axe fell, cleaving a zombie nearly in two. Tharsis shuddered as the song dissolved the magical malaise, releasing him from the crippling despair that had gripped him. Fighting the urge to run from the rotting dead descending on them, he hissed arcane words of power and shot a ball of sparkling blue light from his fingertips, blasting the nearest corpse back into its tightly packed fellows. Eric blinked. His heart still pounded in his ears, but the fear and doubt were melting away, replaced with grim determination. As he raised his spear and shield to the enemy, a scream from behind brought him around. The parted fog didn't rejoin for many yards down the slope, and he could see the twins had started to make their way back up, but one of them was held fast about the ankle by a hand thrust out of the pile of bodies. Even as Eric watched, the whole pile began to move and untangle itself. Corb screamed again as he was pulled towards the twitching mass of limbs. Taven slid back down to his brother, clumsily drawing a hatchet from his awkwardly twisted belt, and began hacking at the grasping arm. Eric looked to Rennie, who was firing into the mass of corpses stumbling downhill towards Meccan. "Ren, help the twins!" Eric thrust his spear through the head of one of the zombies coming at Meccan's flank, and bowled into another with its shield. Rennie turned down slope as the bodies they had found crawled free of the bushes and began clawing their way up. The twins scrabbled back, trying to stay out of their reach, finding little purchase as they desperately hacked at the grasping corpses. Rennie dropped her bow and unslung her pack, pulled the coiled rope she had brought with, and flung the rest away. She cursed desperately at the cord as she unwound it and threw the end down to the twins. "Corby! Tabs!" Rennie quickly looped her end around a large stone sticking up from the ground and sat down, bracing her legs against it and pulling her end of the rope tight. The twins looked up as the rope landed between them. Grinning, they tucked their weapons away and dove onto the rope. They got their feet firmly beneath them and quickly clambered back up to the road, their relief dying quickly at the sight of Meccan and Eric hacking and stabbing wildly at the descending mob of undead. A scream from Rennie drew Taben's attention up the trail as a zombie stumbled out of the fog towards her, and a bright fan of flames from Tharsis drew Korib's attention down the trail. They both pulled weapons from their belts, shouting to each other, "This way!" as they charged in opposite directions. Rennie was just getting to her feet and searching for her bow when the zombie came at her from the fog. With a panicked shout, she drew her pick, trying to back away. As she got the weapon up, Taben bowled past her and into the stinking thing, knocking it off the road to slide down the hill. "Thanks, Tabs." Grinning, Taben clinked his short sword on his iron cap and winked at her. Rennie tucked her pick back into her belt and stooped to retrieve her bow just as more corpses came out from the fog. Reaching for an arrow as she brought up her bow, she was surprised to find her quiver nearly empty. With no time to find the missing arrows, she pulled one of the few remaining and fired up the trail as Taben quickly backed away from the pair of zombies. 3 arrows whipped into the legs and torso of the thing in the lead, before it went down and Rennie was out. Pulling her pick again, she moved up beside Taben to meet the remaining foe. 3 shapes emerged from the mist further back down the trail as Tharsis cast the last of his magic missiles up the slope. As the trio of horrors closed on him, he reached into a small pouch on his belt, fingering the components within. He waited for them to close as he summoned his power to him. Then, hands whipping through the practiced forms, he shouted words of power and bent the weave to his will. A great fan of flames leapt from his splayed fingers, bathing the approaching zombies in fire as he backed away. After a few more faltering steps, fire overcame the unholy bond of flesh and magic that animated the undead things, and they fell into smoking piles. He was out of spells now. He slid the case hanging at his side to his back and drew out the dagger the twins' father had given him. He had accepted the weapon graciously, but inwardly had doubted he would need it. He was grateful for it now, though. Sharp knives save lives, he muttered to himself, praying it was true as another zombie rolled down the slope and onto the trail. The rotting thing got to its feet and started towards Eric and Meccan. With a piping wail, Tharsis charged the thing, barreling into it at the same time Korib did. They went down in a heap, both stabbing wildly at the thing as it clawed and bit at them. Tharsis screamed as he stabbed over and over until Korib pulled him away from the ruined thing. It had stopped moving. Korib grinned up at the taller boy. "You stink." Tharsis noticed the smell too and looked down to find his shirt covered in black slime. He would have been sick on the spot had Korib not pulled him away from the slope just then, as another zombie stumbled onto the trail near where they had been standing. With a quick glance at each other, they charged the thing, screaming at the top of their lungs as they went. Eric was tiring. His arms felt like lead weights as he lifted his shield before him and pulled his spear back for another thrust, skewering the thing that had fallen onto the trail at his feet. He stabbed again and again before stepping up and slamming his shield down on its head. The dead kept coming. They were shambling and sliding out of the mists and onto the trail in an endless tide. Lifting his shield from the ruin of the creature on the ground, he got it up just in time to intercept the zombie bearing down on him. The thing hit hard on his shield, bashing the rim into his cheek as it reached around to claw at his shoulders and neck. Just as he thought he might go over backwards, a gauntleted hand to his back steadied him. He was able to turn his shield aside enough to send the thing stumbling past. 2 meaty thwacks behind him told him he would not have to worry about that one. He continued on, stabbing and bashing, again and again as the mindless pack fell on them. Any that got past or came at them from the sides meeting the heavy, cleaving strokes of Meccan's long axe. Everything hurt. Eric couldn't tell how much of the blood soaking his clothes, leaking into his eyes, and dripping from his elbows was even his. The raking claws and yellowed teeth scored only small hurts, but they were adding up. He was bleeding from a dozen bites and rakes when the light from Meccan's holy symbol suddenly dimmed and winked out. Eric speared another zombie as it stepped onto the trail, driving it to the ground before withdrawing the spear. He leaned on it for support as he stepped in to stomp on the thing's head. Expecting the fog to roll back in any second, he spared a glance over his shoulder. Meccan knelt in the middle of the road, chest heaving as he leaned on his axe. But the fog did not return. In fact, as Eric looked around, he realized it had cleared considerably. Up the trail, Eric saw one of the twins sitting on a zombie, cursing loudly at it while he struggled to keep its hands from his throat. Rennie limped up to the pair as he watched and put her pick through the side of its head. A gurgling splatter drew Eric's attention back the other way. Tharsis was bent over in the middle of the road, surrounded by charred, blasted, or otherwise mutilated corpses, gagging and retching, the other of the twins laughing while he thumped him on the back. Eric walked to the trail's edge. The zombies were gone, as were the bodies they had discovered in the brush. Rennie helped Meccan to his feet as the others gathered up all the scattered belongings they could find. They limped away from the stinking mess of the battle before sitting down to tend their wounds. Korib squirted water from his skin into his hair and face, grimacing as the ichor sluiced off him. Tharsis snapped his fingers. "Wait, I've got something!" Pulling his pack off, he rummaged around a moment before pulling a white handkerchief out. Walking up to Korib, he wiped his face with it before inspecting the delicate cloth. Smiling, he turned it around to show everyone. It was still white and pristine, without sign of blood or grime. Master Olned showed us how to make these. Had Tenness and I do the dusting for Medine with them. Everyone wanted to turn with it as they passed it around to clean the stinking mess from themselves before turning it on their clothes, weapons, and armor. Finally clean and rested enough, Meccan laid his hands on Rennie's twisted ankle and muttered a prayer. A gentle glow leaped from between his fingers as he cast the spell, and Rennie tested the foot to find it could bear her weight again. He repeated the spell several more times on the worst of their wounds, before casting a purifying spell to protect against disease on Tharsis, who had been covered head to toe in vile fluids. Eric sat down next to Taven and handed him the cloth. "Those bodies in the bushes, did any of them have white hair?" Taven took the cloth and started cleaning his boots. No dwarf there either. Eric nodded, his eyes wandering up to where he thought the tower must be. We'll stay here for the night then. We should reach the top by tomorrow afternoon. They made a small fire and brewed some tea. No one was hungry, no one wanted to chat, and no one argued when Eric said he'd take the first watch.